Hi, boys and girls. It's time for this week's story. And our story is called Just Like the Heavenly Father's Love. It was in the early 1950s. Patty was an only child, so she had lots of things. She had a beautiful bedroom with a canopy bed where everything was ruffly, and she had all the toys she could want. One other thing was she had an Uncle Alan. And Uncle Alan, he didn't get to come very often, but Patty was his favorite niece. Well, Patty knew that Uncle Alan was going to come soon. She got everything all fixed up in her bedroom because she wanted to bring him upstairs to see some things. Well, finally, the time of the day came, and Patty looked out her window and she saw Uncle Alan's car drive up. And she ran down the stairs. She ran to the door and she threw it open. And she said, Uncle Alan, come in. And she jumped up in his arms. Now, Uncle Alan was just as glad to see her as she was to see him. And they went in the house. And of course, Uncle Alan had to talk to Mommy and Daddy for a while. But Patty, she couldn't hardly take it. Finally, after she thought enough time had gone by, she went over to where Uncle Alan was sitting and she said, Come on, Uncle Alan, come upstairs. I want you to see my room and all the new things I've gotten. And Uncle Alan, would you like to see my dolly collection? Well, of course, Uncle Alan said, I'd love to see all your dollies. So up the stairs they went to that pretty pink bedroom. And Patty went over and she patted the bed and she said, You sit right here. I'm going to show you what all my dollies can do. So first of all, she got out her chatty Cathy. Now, just like the name is, Chatty Cathy could actually talk. And she said all kinds of wonderful things. Well, Uncle Alan thought she was extremely smart and beautiful. And he said, I really like her. My, she has a lot to say, doesn't she? And Patty laughed. She said, She does. But, wait till you see my Betsy Wetsey. Now, Betsy Wetsey, she did things that no dolly had ever been able to do before this. Might of fact, you could feed her with a tiny little bottle full of water that you pretended was milk. And do you know what? Just like a real baby, she would wet her diaper. That's how she got her name, Betsy Wetsey. And Uncle Alan, he laughed and he laughed. He said, Be real careful when you give her her milk, that you have a nice dry diaper to put on her. Well, Patty, she changed Betsy Wetsey, and she put her in her bed, and she put her little blanket over top of her, and she started rocking the cradle. Well, that wasn't all. The next dolly she got out was a Tiny Tears. And just like Betsy Wetsey's name, Tiny Tears was a little baby doll. And she had curly, curly brown hair. And it was short. And she cried real tears when she said, "Wah, wah." Well, Uncle Alan thought she was pretty neat, too. He picked up both of those baby dolls and he pretended to be rocking them. And he laughed. He laughed when Tiny Tears cried and had tears running down her cheeks. And he thought it was terribly funny when Betsy Wetsey wet her diaper. Well, then, that wasn't all the dollies that little Patty had. She got out another dolly, and this dolly was a walking dolly. If you took hold of her hand, you could walk right beside her. And you know, Patty wasn't very old, so that walking dolly was almost as tall as she was. And when you held her hand, she just primly walked right beside you. And Uncle Alan, he clapped again. He said, "Your dollies do fabulous things." Well, then Patty got out one other dolly that she had. And you know, for some reason, I can't remember her name. But when you put her on the floor and you wound her up, she would she would be on her hands and her knees, and she would crawl across the floor. Well, do you know what Uncle Alan did? He got down on his hands and knees and he started crawling right along beside that dolly. And he said, your doll collection is just amazing." Well, then he got up off the floor and he dusted off his knees and he sat back down on that edge of that bed. And he said, "Now, Patty, will you tell me which of all these dollies?" And my, Uncle Alan hadn't seen them all. There was a whole cabinet full of pretty dollies that you just looked at. And there were other baby dolls, and there were bigger dolls that sat, and there were ones that could stand up, and there were ones that when you laid them down, their eyes closed. My, she had a collection of dollies. And he pointed around and he said, "Which of those dollies are your favorite, Patty? Which do you love the most?" And Patty, she said, "None of these." And Uncle Alan said, "Well, show me the one you love the most." And she said, "I don't think you'd want to see her." And Uncle Alan said, "Why not? Of course I'd love to see her." "Patty," she said, "are you sure, Uncle Alan? Are you really sure that you'd like to see her? You won't laugh at her?" Uncle Alan, he got very, very serious and he said, "I would never laugh at your favorite dolly." So Patty said, "Okay, you promise." So she went over to that pink canopy bed with all the ruffles on it. And she pulled up the bedspread and she looked under the bed. She stuck her hand in there and out she pulled a little pink suitcase, a dolly suitcase. Well, then she looked at Uncle Allen again and said, "You promise you won't laugh?" Uncle Allen said, "Cross my heart and hope to die. Of course I won't laugh at her." Well, she opened the little fasteners on the front of that little suitcase and she raised the lid and she smiled when she looked inside, and very carefully she pulled out a dolly. One of the dolly's arms was just missing, and one of the dolly's eyes wouldn't come open, and the dolly's hair, it looked like somebody had washed it. They didn't know what they were doing, and they had taken a scissor and just cut it this way and that way, and there were big bald spots on top of that dolly's head. And she didn't cry, she didn't walk, she didn't crawl, and she didn't wet. Might of fact, she didn't even drink a bottle. But Patty, she picked her up out of that suitcase and she held her very, very close. Oh, and Uncle Allen said, "Patty, why do you love her so much?" And she said, "Because if I don't love her, nobody will." Uncle Allen, he understood then. Boys and girls, it's a short story, but do you know what that's just like? God, our Heavenly Father, loves us, even if we have bald spots on top of our head, even if our eyes don't open and shut right, even if we don't have an arm, even if we can't walk or crawl or talk or drink a bottle. God still loves you. And do you know what? I think He loves those children almost more than He does other children. And maybe it's like Patty said, if I don't love them, God said, just like Patty had, if I don't love them, maybe nobody will. And you know what else? God is going to, when He takes us to heaven, He's going to give all the boys and girls wonderful bodies that every part of them works. And He's going to love them just like He loved them when they were down here on earth. You know, He likes those perfect little boys and girls. But He for sure loves boys and girls that aren't quite perfect. But when God looks at them, they're as perfect as they can be, because He sees what He's going to make them. And He loves them just like Patty loved that little dolly. Thank you, boys and girls, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.